This video is only tangentially about Cersei Lannister. It's actually about House of the Dragon and the way it writes its women. I enjoy this show. I have more fun watching it than I ever had watching Game of Thrones, but I think House of the Dragon is a very interesting example of an adaptation that both understands its source material better than people are willing to give it credit for, but it's also strangely afraid of its source material in a way Game of Thrones never was. House of the Dragon is an adaptation of Fire and Blood, which is not exactly a traditional novel. It's a chronicle of the history of the Targaryen dynasty written by a historian within Westeros. Primary sources reflect the biases of the authors writing them and the political agendas of the people in power who have commissioned these texts. So, as an imaginary history book, Fire and Blood is trying to do the same thing. Westeros is, of course, pseudo-medieval England, and everyone's a misogynist, hence why women are only ever brought up when they're either giving birth to heirs, or dying while giving birth to heirs, or are caught up in reputation-destroying public scandals. And because of this frame device, there are no characters in Fire and Blood the way there are in A Song of Ice and Fire. These people are being perceived by men who have never met them, who are instead relying on certain societal stereotypes to make sense of their lives. Take, for example, Alicent. Alicent in Fire and Blood is not a fully realized character. She's an object lesson on Westerosi conceptions of womanhood. The favorable account of her is that she was a pious woman who only ever lived to serve her sons and obviously had no conflicting personal desires of her own. The unfavorable account of her is that she was a spiteful stepmother who wished to bathe in the blood of her enemies. This is obviously not a real woman. This is a certain idea of a woman constructed by a misogynistic society. And the show seems to have done this very well in the way it adapts that version of Alicent in Fire and Blood through how she's perceived by Criston Cole and Larys Strong. Criston sees her as this dutiful, pious queen to Rhaenyra's indecent and spoiled princess, which she's not. She's not actually happy about being locked in a castle made to squeeze out heirs. She just pretends to be. Larys sees her as a vindictive stepmother. This is because he's insane, but also because he feels a kind of kinship with her. Larys' disability excludes him from the political sphere of able-bodied men. He's socially feminized the way Varys is in the main series. The first time we see him, he is actually sitting with the women because he can't go hunting with the men. He's an outsider at court, just like Alicent. He feels bitter about it, just like Alicent, ergo she would approve of things such as burning your entire family to bring Otto Hightower back to court. In this scene, which takes place the morning after this scene, he genuinely thinks she wants Luke's eye gouged out as payment for her sons. She doesn't, she was just having a bit of a mental breakdown. Otto, her father, on the other hand, is immensely pleased with this potential for violence he has glimpsed in her. Otto also forced her into this life when he told her to go to Viserys' chambers that night, so from his perspective it's like, yeah, you can be aggressive towards our enemies, but you still have to do everything I say. So what they've done here is made Larys and Criston embody the two different facets of Otto's patriarchal control over Alicent. By season 2, these two men have literally replaced Otto in her life. Larys schemes to get Otto fired from the position of Hand, and Criston then becomes Hand in his stead. They don't have the same emotional leverage over her as a father would, but they're still men who have been granted positions of power, and they do use that power to restrict her own autonomy. Now, Larys, for example, fires all her household staff to replace them with spies of his own, and her relationship with Criston comes to an end when he denies her the promotion to regent, even though she was obviously the best candidate for it. So this is a woman who is deeply bitter about having to follow all these patriarchal mandates, but follows them all the same, and while she's capable of wielding violence when it suits her ends, she's not without reason. But the men around her perceive her through these cultural stereotypes and will continue to do so long after her death. This is how George R. R. Martin writes his women. They're all hopelessly, catastrophically misunderstood by the men in their lives. They're denied personhood, they're denied interiority, and they're projected upon. Ned tells Robert he never truly saw Lyanna, that he was in love with a fantasy of her that didn't exist. Ned himself is not fully capable of understanding Cersei. He is so convinced that she would choose to run instead of retaliating, and he's of course wrong. It proves to be the most costly mistake of his life. House of the Dragon's faithful reproduction of this element of George's writing, which I would say was definitely missing from Game of Thrones, is what makes both Alicent and Rhaenyra genuinely well-written characters, to a degree. In Season 1, Episode 8, we see Alicent ruthlessly covering up what Aegon has done to the serving girl. I think you're supposed to read the scene as Alicent feeling a kind of sympathy for her, because she's been there too. But as an adult, her life has been shaped in such a way that she's now helping continue that cycle of repression. An even better example is her relationship with her daughter Helena. Helena is kind of forced to live out Alicent's life. Her mother marries her off and she's then made to have these kids as a teenager. Alicent has done to her what Otto did to her all those years ago. Season 2 is about her coming to terms with this fact. Her shame and Helena's suffering is what causes her to choose Helena over Aegon in the finale. But at this point in Season 1, Alicent's entire life has been leading up to Aegon's coronation. This is what she lives for. But then in Episode 9, you get this incomprehensible scene of the Green Council, where Alicent expresses shock at Otto's scheme to usurp the throne. Like, did she not know? She was colluding with Otto to deprive Luke of Driftmark, and they wanted to do this so Team Black would no longer be in possession of the Valyrian fleet, because they're fully expecting to go to war at this point. And literally the next morning, she's going to claim that she didn't know that the plan was to install Aegon as king. That is ridiculous, that makes no sense, and it was clearly done to exonerate her from having to make the difficult and selfish decision to crown Aegon king. Which brings me to the title of this video. Everyone is afraid of Cersei Lannister, or more specifically what George is trying to say with Cersei Lannister. Cersei has a lot of similarities with Alicent and Rhaenyra to the point where I think it's obvious that she was the clear inspiration for both characters. Like Alicent, she's been denied bodily autonomy half her life in a miserable marriage with the king. Like Rhaenyra, she feels stifled by her gender. Jaime and Daemon occupy the same role here, a copy of them who gets to do everything that they're not allowed to do as women. Cersei Lannister is as much of a victim of the patriarchy as Alicent and Rhaenyra are. But Cersei is also a perpetrator of patriarchal control. She's subordinate to her husband and father, but she still enjoys power derived from an unjust feudal hierarchy. And she uses that power. She uses it to remain in power, she uses it to consolidate more power. And the books are very clear about one thing, that her desire for power, which in this case is about wanting to be free of patriarchal oppression, is not what makes her a villain. It's her investment in patriarchal violence that turns her into a tyrant, that turns her into Tywin Lannister. So what I'm saying is, Cersei is allowed to be both a victim of patriarchy and then a perpetrator of patriarchal control. And that is a problem with House of the Dragon, isn't it? It is so afraid of letting these two women exercise political violence. Rhaenyra Targaryen spends like half a season not wanting to go to war because, unlike her brothers, she supposedly cares about the stability of the realms. There's this insidious threat throughout the show that all these women, who all belong to the same aristocratic class as these men, which means even though they were not educated in warcraft, they were still taught to glorify martial prowess. All these women are for some reason sickened by the idea of war and are seeking to prevent it. Rhaenyra in Fire and Blood is actually very similar to Aegon. They both have illegitimate children, they both employ unrestrained violence against traitors, but only Rhaenyra is identified as uniquely unsuited to rule by the male chroniclers who have written down these histories. The point George is obviously making is that she's perceived much more harshly than Aegon just because she's a woman, and that is completely lost in the show if you refuse to make her do anything ethically questionable. Whenever she does actually do something questionable, like having Daemon snap this guy's neck so they could marry, and having Daemon cut off this guy's head, it's walked back on. Rhaenyra is suddenly a pacifist. Oh no, Daemon, you can't go to war, even though I married you for the express purpose of sending you to war in my name. Then after half a season's worth of hesitance, when she finally burns a bunch of peasants alive in her pursuit for power, she still cannot bring herself to go take King's Landing with her new dragons. Instead, Alicent has to offer up the city to her. She kills Otto in front of half her court in what is genuinely a very good scene. But then again, in last Sunday's episode, Alicent is telling her, you will have to press people to keep sitting on that throne. And oh my god, she knows this. She's known this since the day she married Daemon. She grew up at court. She knows how politics works. And this is what I mean when I say that the show is afraid of the source material it's working with. I don't need either of them to commit Cersei-level atrocities, but the story that you're telling is about women committing various acts of political violence to maintain their privileged positions of power. But you're afraid to tell it.
I have done all I could! Will you blame me only for what men have done?
And the thing is, Alicent was present at the Green Council table when Tyrion discussed moving the crown's gold. Obviously, she doesn't know where it is, but it is insulting to suggest that she was a helpless spectator in the plot to install Aegon as king. There's a very gender essentialist bent to the writing of this show. This insistence that all these men are tearing Rhaenyra and Alicent apart, who obviously only want to hold hands. I mean, there is some truth to it. As teenage girls, they were forced into opposing political positions by their fathers. Otto when he made Alicent marry Viserys, Viserys when he made Rhaenyra his heir, but then chose to have a son anyway. But by the time they're adults, they've generally come to possess antagonistic goals. They both know they'll have to go to war for their personal interests, and those personal interests do not align. But when we get to the final episodes of Season 1, the show suddenly insists actually these two poor women are being pitted against each other by these awful men. Like, what are we doing? Up until now, these two were active agents in this story. You can't suddenly make them passive and then claim this is a feminist narrative. Another bit from Sunday's episode I didn't like is this scene. It's not a good scene. It's not good because I think you can tell this was added to firstly make his execution completely justifiable to the audience, and secondly because this attempted assault on Alicent from a member of the Green Council allows them to ignore the fact that Rhaenyra, who's on her way to King's Landing, is now someone who is a danger to Alicent. She's finally assumed the kind of political authority that Viserys used to possess, that Aegon and Aemon later did, and they only used it to police her bodily and political autonomy. Rhaenyra is capable of it too. I mean, she's holding her prisoner. Except Alicent's not really a queen in chains, is she? She seems to be on a bit of light house arrest, and is immediately giving Rhaenyra advice in the episode after she executed Alicent's father. I think part of the reason they keep doing this is because of Rhaenyra and Alicent's friendship. She loves Alicent about as much as she loves Daemon, despite all the hurt either of them has caused her. This is the story that they're telling. The childhood companionship is the biggest adaptation change here. I find it to be a good one because it makes for better drama, but it's also the most controversial change. Many people simply do not buy it. They don't like it. Making these two any more hostile to each other than they already are will cause even more people to not like it. The other thing is that they're afraid of a negative audience reaction to these two women. They're 2 out of 3 leads of the show. Which, yes, a lot of people would hate them for things they would never hate Daemon or Aegon or Aemon for. But you can't honestly write for that section of your audience. You don't do that. You don't write for the bad faith reader, you write for the people who'll engage with your work deeply and sincerely. We would have never gotten either Cersei Lannister or Catelyn Stark if George cared about what Twitter thinks of his books. Season 3 is not over yet. We've got like 5 episodes left. This trend could change. They're definitely angling towards some kind of a corruption arc for her, even if it looks like the direction they're going for is that of a delusional god complex. I will say again that I do actually like the show. I love what they've done with Daemon, who I think is the most consistently well-written character here. And I love how they've made both Alicent and Daemon the centerpiece of Rhaenyra's life, because it really does make for a better story. But the whole thing would be so much better if we could just let these two women exercise political power the way we let Daemon Targaryen do it.